we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Lisa Campbell. I'm the director of the Berrie Center for the Arts, and we're thrilled that you were able to join us for the screening this evening of Loyalty Code by Ramapo College professor Kelly Dolak. Kelly is here with us this evening to have a little talk about her work, and I'm going to ask her to start out and just tell us a little bit about your background, Kelly, and the body of work that you've created.
Sure. I just want to thank everybody who watched the film tonight, and also to Ed and Lisa for asking me to participate in this event. It's a really great platform, especially in these times. So I started out in television and working in different cable networks. And then after that, I produced my first feature film. I went to Afghanistan for 4 months and shot that film. And then after that, I worked on some shorts in between, Postcards from Tora Bora, which was the film I shot in Afghanistan, and then this film, Loyalty Code, which is my recent feature.
Great. So Kelly, I know that you're a Penn State alum. You and I talked about that earlier. But tell me, what about this whole story, this situation, made you want to go and start capturing footage and make this film?
I actually, I was teaching the day that the news broke about what was going on at Penn State, and I finished my class, and I was just like, I couldn't stop thinking about what was happening there, and you know, the sort of mythological proportions of the story of Joe Paterno, and you know, growing up around there and knowing how big Paterno was and football culture was, and the Penn State family, and how much like the community kind of imbued those notions of like family in terms of like who went to school there. And I just thought it was a big story. And I also was really interested in just what happened there and trying to find out. And I honestly wasn't sure my focus yet. So I just got in my car, I loaded up all my gear and went there and started filming. And I thought, okay, I'm going to find my story once I'm there.
That's great. So this might be a good time to ask that question. I'm just curious, when you start the process of making a film, you know, where do you get your story ideas? In this case, I think we do know, but you know, generally speaking, where do you get ideas? And are there accepted, tell us a little bit about accepted practices of, you know, of ethics and telling a story based on real people in this genre of documentary film?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great question. You know, I think I'm attracted to different themes, things that we all go through. And I think that the core of this story was loyalty and the commitments that we make to things, and how loyalty might not be the best code if we're trying to, you know, be responsible to other people. You know, what Eric Silver says in the documentary, you know, the code of humanity. How do we care about everybody? And so I was really like, I read his article about the Penn State scandal and how he focused on loyalty. And I thought that's really my story there. Is, I mean, yes, the football culture there is, you know, it's intriguing. People are very interested in that. You know, it's almost borderlines on a little bit of like a cult of personality. You know, but I was really interested in loyalty, and how I decided to like find these students who, you know, who had different relationship to loyalty, and kind of you know, look at loyalty through the lens of what's happening there.
So this is a great opportunity, saying cults, to ask Stan's question. He wrote in and said, during the filming of the Penn State, during the film, the Penn State mindset had numerous times him thinking about Jonestown, and he's wondering, you know, are the two analogous?
That's, yeah, I mean, I think I hadn't watched the film in a couple of months, but I watched it tonight because I wanted it to be fresh again.
Sure.
You know, I sort of lived and breathed it for so long and then sort of stepped away from it. But it's for me now. I'm looking at the film through the lens of the Trump era, and the important things that we're looking at in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, and also what we're faced with the pandemic, and these commitments that we make and loyalty that we make to things that can compromise, I think, probably our evolution. So yeah, I think it can.
So Daniel wrote a note here, and he said, in some ways, the viewer is left unclear on what happened to the Sandusky lawsuit. Those of us old enough to remember can recall, but younger viewers might ask, especially in this day of discounting witnesses. Do you have any thoughts, any response you want to make to that?
Yeah, I mean, I do have the part where he is convicted, where Sandusky's convicted. I think after that, what happens to Penn State administrators is, it was still kind of gray at the end of making the film. There were still lawsuits that were being, sort of played out, but Sandusky was charged, and he's in prison for his offenses.
Yeah. So what larger application do you see to the loyalty codes in our society? You started to address some of them. I just think about everything from religion to politics to our work to our friends. I mean, there's so many ways that it can apply. But what did you want audiences to take away from the film?
Well, one thing that I was really drawn to was the moral indignation that people had about the scandal. And of course, we can all agree that child sexual abuse is wrong, and that we have a moral obligation to reporting it if we know it. But why don't we do it? Why don't we report it? Like the end of the film, it says that 70% of all sexual assaults go unreported, and this certainly did. This went unreported for decades, and just I don't know if any viewers there. I know in my life I have seen that happen. And the Me Too movement and Weinstein and, all of this stuff, like, something's going on, and people they're like, that's awful, that's terrible. But it's like, I really like the professor and the one grad student in the film who says they might not have been able to do anything differently. And I think that what I wanted with the takeaway of the film is to cut through some of that, the barriers that we put up to asking the question why things don't get reported, and we just say, of course I would have done the right thing. And I don't believe that. I don't believe that I want us to, but I think our commitments, whether they be financial or familial, if a family member committed a crime, I think we would have a lot of dialogue about our moral responsibility and what we would do.
Yeah. So Bobby, this is more a comment than a question, but it's interesting. Said, I watched and remembered this terrible event. The most interesting moment for me was the sociology professor explaining moral code versus loyalty code. Peace and love versus bad things can happen. And I see that playing out today, which you've already spoken to several things. There's an anonymous attendee that's written in and said, what do you think about the comparison of the Catholic Church issues and the ego of someone like Paterno, who may have thought he could control the situation himself? That's an interesting thought.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's I think that's really interesting, and it's like maybe there's a little bit of disbelief of what's happening, but then also how do you deal with it? And then I think people make bad decisions about how they deal with it. Like they don't deal with it, and then they cover it up, and they pass somebody off to another church, and I think that's what they did with Sandusky. And I was hoping in the film that I showed that the administrators, they weren't equipped to deal with it. They just were like, tell him that he shouldn't come to these, he shouldn't come to the the shower locker rooms. He's not allowed in there anymore. But what beyond that was done is the big question.
Right. Do you think Paterno's achievements are forever intertwined with Sandusky's activities? I mean, I realize Mr. Paterno obviously has since passed, but do you have any sense about that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think for myself, yes. Go as a person who went to Penn State, I don't call myself a Penn Stater. I wasn't part of the Penn State family. I think I was like just not a joiner in that way. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely tainted my notion of him. I think in the film it shows you how a lot of people wrangle with it. They're like he espoused a moral code that people believed that he couldn't do no wrong. He could do no wrong. And when he did, I think it was really rattling for people. And I think some people, like the woman at the end who's just like, Paterno is amazing. After everything that came out about it, it just nothing could change his mind. It really reminded me of Donald Trump's presidency, and how I think some people were like, okay, well, now that people know this, there's no way they're going to get behind him, but they still did. It's like now I watch this film with it just feels like the Trump era is layering over top of it for me anyway.
Emily has asked a question. She wants to know what was the most challenging part of creating this documentary?
Hmm. That's a good question. It took a long time for the film to get made because I was waiting in real time for the hearings, the court case, the free report, the NCAA, what was going to happen to the administrators. I think that was hard. I think also the hardest thing for me, hands down, was being in the courtroom with the victims and them telling their story of what happened, with Sandusky sitting there. I think that was, for me, just really, really difficult. Yeah.
Somebody has made another comment, which I think is interesting. They said they found it disturbing that several people said that whistleblowing is too hard for humans. And then they go on to share that they did it and lost their job one time, but I would do the same thing again. That makes me think of the young, is he a GA or he was an assistant, somebody on the coaching team, the guy, and he really sort of took his lumps for his willingness to come forward. Any thoughts about that?
No, I think it's hard, but I think in the end, it's what Eric Silver says. It's like the code of humanity. It's the highest form of morality, is to, disregard your self-interest. Like, okay, I might lose my job, I might lose my friends, I might lose my family, but I'm committed to this higher moral decision. And I think that it's hard, but I think I guess, it is what we need to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Kelly, I want to shift gears just a little bit. I want to talk about the process of filmmaking. You talked about, finding the story and the ethics, but one thing I've always wondered when I love documentary film is, give us some sense. Do you shoot tons and tons and tons and tons of footage, and then how you, sort of put that discerning eye on what stays in and what stays out, and how you sort of carve the story? And in the case, if the subject matter is still active, if the story is still active, or the person is, in this case, is still alive, do you involve them, or how do you involve them in the editing? What are your sort of thoughts about that? Can you help us to understand process a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like I said, I wanted to tell a story about what happened at Penn State, but I wasn't sure of the focus and what subjects I would use to tell the story. But I think when I find, I look for the core ideas and the sort of like, the themes that are in conflict with each other in the story, like the Penn State family and loyalty, and then moral responsibility. And once I sort of found that and how I wanted to explore it from the student's perspective, and where I was hoping to see a change. That's what I look for when I'm looking for a doc. And not to, I have my own ideas, but I want to explore it. I don't want to know all the answers, or I'm going to get bored with the topic as well. They challenged me too, in terms of, their belonging was really deep. And I had to not dismiss their connections to Penn State and their connection to this Penn State family that I don't really quite understand. And I think being open to that and not being dismissive, even though it's not my experience and it's theirs. You know, I think that was a good opening up for me, and just like learning, you know, learning in the process of it. I shot like 300 hours of footage, so it was a lot of footage over, you know, 4 years. And you know, it's a mess at first, and then, but you know, I write everything down, and you know, I use story structure. I mean, I use narrative structure like it was fiction, you know, and basically like find those plot points and kind of do a bunch of edits, and you know, get a bunch of feedback from people, see how
Sure.
they react. So
So Susan has asked a question here. First of all, she echoes Stan's compliment to you about the quality of the film, how great it was.
thank you.
She said, I really enjoyed the film, which provoked a lot of self-reflection. Have you ever faced a decision like this, loyalty versus the greater good, that compelled you to research this event and then want to tell this story?
Yeah, yes, I have. um I
Are
have.
you, do you find that you're drawn to projects like that, Kelly, when you look at your body of work?
No, yes, I think so. I think, you know, my last film was about a woman trying to find her father in Afghanistan, who chose to, you know, fight for his country and abandon his family. And it's like
Mm,
he decided to make this commitment, and he becomes this war hero, but he's kind of like, you know, kind of a deadbeat dad to his kids. And so I like that conflict. I like those things that, you know, we think we're going to do the right thing, or I like when things get complicated. And you know, obviously there is the right thing in this situation, but why don't people do it? You know, it's the big question.
so now I'm going to make you be a professor for a second, in case hopefully we have some students who watch this evening. So as a professor working with young filmmakers, what responsibility, you know, do you feel you have in training the next generation? Do you, and I'm also really curious, do you see a lot of students that are interested specifically in this style in documentary film, or are they more interested in, you know, fiction?
No, I think they're interested in both. I mean, when I show them examples of storytelling, whether it's fiction or doc, you know, I think that, you know, if it's a compelling story, they're really engaged regardless. And I ask students what they're watching, and oftentimes, you know, they love documentary series. So I think that's something that really resonates for students. And you know, I think in terms of like helping them in the process of making a film, you know, I just, you know, support them in the process of it. What's that initial spark? And then, you know, how can it grow into something, you know, larger, where they're asking questions, and, you know, seeing where those answers go, you know?
Yeah, that's great. Well, I am at the end of my questions, and I'm looking in the feed. If anybody has any last minute questions and you put it into the Q&A function, I'm happy to ask Kelly as we wrap up our chat this evening. I want to take an opportunity. First of all, Kelly, thank you so much for working with us on this. Thank you for allowing us to be able to share this link. The film is on, I'll make one little plug, it's on Amazon Prime. So if you know other people that might be interested, or you want to view it again, it is available currently on Amazon Prime. Here we go, we got
Thank
another
you.
question. Regina's asking, how did it feel going back? As a Penn State alum, you had a deeper understanding of the sense of community and loyalty among students and alum, and you showed that so well.
Hmm.
Just
That's a
wondering
great
how did
question.
it feel
They're
going
all
back?
such great questions. Thank you, everybody. Um, it was hard. It was hard because I felt like an insider and an outsider. I used it in some ways. I was like, okay, I'm a Penn State alum. Can I get into a football game? Can I get into this board of trustees meeting? And they said yes. So you know, I did do that. But I'm an outsider in the sense that I never went to a Penn State football game in all those years, and so it was like an insider outsider, but I have a strong connection to the school for sure, you know,
Sure.
but just in a different way than I think the people in the film had mostly.
Right. Kelly, thank you again. I want to say to our audience, I hope that you can join us for the next 3 Tuesdays at 7 p.m., where we will be showing more Ramapo faculty films. Next week, I'll be joined by Marta Bottas, and we'll be screening also a documentary film that she shot called The Condor in the Reeds. It's just a really interesting piece of film also, and I hope you can join us for that. So again, we would ask you to register for those events. If you go to our website, www.ramapo.edu/Berrie Center, all the links are there the next 4 Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. Thanks again, Kelly, and thanks to you for joining us.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you.